I'm not going out to dance. I'm going out to fuck. Like, I'm the seedy gay who's like looking for the other person who's like also looking to like, hey, you just want to quickly like go in the bathroom and just like fucking just bang real quick and then whatever. Like, that's more me. I feel like you're either like the drugs and alcohol gay, or you're the sex gay, or if not drugs and alcohol, then naturally it's just dancing.
I see. Yeah, because that's the thing. Like, I feel like you can fuck people anywhere, but you can't dance anywhere.
Well, I you know what? I hear that as a challenge.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. For a while in the early 2010s, XES Lounge was the place to be on a Monday night, where drag queens Frostie, Flakes and Bob the Drag Queen, who at the time was going by the name Kitten Withawhip, hosted their show Sisters, winning crowds over with their ramshackle charm. In the crowd every week was Honey La Bronx, vegan drag queen, LGBTQ rights activist, host of Big Fat Vegan radio podcast, and Bob's drag daughter. We caught up to discuss the pull of Manhattan, why it's not really that great an idea to take your tap shoes to the club, and how XS Lounge provided a sense of community and home.
May I talk directly to the listener right now?
Yeah, sure, go.
Listener, there are going to be stories that I start and then I just don't. Anyway, moving on.
So when did you move to New York?
I moved to New York in 2000, September. Nope. October 2000. Well, September 2000. I did this thing where I came to New York with two incipient roommates, and then we all searched for an apartment, found the apartment, essentially moved in. But before moving in, I decided, I'm like, okay, I got the apartment, touched base. Now I'm going to go back to Wisconsin for 1 month, tie up loose ends, and then move in. So officially, I moved to New York October of 2000.
But you came with friends, like you came with a safety net.
Do not call them friends.
Ooh.
No, they were actually. It's funny. They were Matt and Lori, and Matt, his aunt. Was and still is Priscilla Lopez, Tony Award-winning actress from the original cast of Chorus Line. She sang Nothing every day for a week. We would try to feel the motion. That one. I remember he was a playwright when we first met, and I was reading one of his plays and blah, blah, blah. We met. This is back in the days of AOL, America Online. And so he and I met somehow on there, and we were like just pen pals. And then we decided we're both moving to New York. Let's team up and find an apartment. So we met in New York during the couple of weeks that we were there to find the apartment. And oh my God, we thought we were going to be best friends in the world. And have you ever met someone in person? As soon as you lay eyes on each other, you both realize, oh, we don't like each other.
You recoil.
Just the second we laid eyes on each other. And today we can laugh about it because we've sort of like reunited and bumped into each other now that we're old men. But he actually went on to become Matthew Lopez. If you follow Broadway theater, I'm so proud of him as I say this, the Matthew Lopez, fucking Google him, playwright. He just wrote a play called The Inheritance, which is the gay play of our time. I haven't seen it, but now I fucking wish I did. Why unnecessary swears? But so that was my first roommate, Matthew Lopez. But anyways, I moved to New York then in September of 2000. And I have to say, I moved here like right before September 11th. of 2001 to be exact.
Yes.
And so I can just say the New York I moved to was a different New York than the New York that we live in today.
And so what was the plan then? Was it like, I'm going to New York, I'm going to become a star? Or was it just, I'm getting away from my town?
Ooh, I think, well, I don't know that
it could be both, I guess.
I don't know that yes, but I don't know that stardom was ever like a part of, like, I've kind of never had the idea of like, yes, one day I want to be famous, or I want to. I'm sure to some extent ego is always at work, but I don't feel like ego ever played a part in it like that. I loved doing musical theater, and at that time, all I could envision for myself was, well, I like doing musical theater. I like singing and dancing, being on stage in a musical. So if that's what you like, the thing you do is move to New York and you try to be a Broadway actor. And I've never actually tried. I went to one audition in my life for one Broadway musical. It was for I moved to New York right when the musical 42nd Street was being revived. And that was my all-time favorite Broadway musical. It was the first one I ever did in what we call middle school, which is grades 6 through 8. You enter middle school at 11 years of age, and then you exit at about 14 years of age and start high school. And so that's where we first started doing musical theater, and very ambitious for 11-year-olds to do 42nd Street. It's like all tap dance.
This is the thing. Like, so when I watch American TV shows and like
yes.
the kids are doing musicals, I'm always just like, this is a bit far-fetched. This is ridiculous. But it's actually like that actually happens.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, at least in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, at Longfellow Middle School, it sure did.
That's hardcore.
Thank you, Nancy Vizentainer Armstrong, our director choreographer.
Anyway, I took you off. So 42nd Street, sure. You were tapping.
So I moved to. I was when I was living in Wisconsin. I dropped out of college. Not dropped out. I decided I'm like, college is a scam, and I still kind of stand by that. I'm like, listen, if you're gonna do brain surgery on me, I really prefer that you went to college. Although I did not. And I do know how to operate for a cerebral aneurysm and a subdural hematoma. My dad gave me a simulated brain surgery video game when I was in like 12 years old. So anyway, but you know, I mean, I'm not saying I know how to do brain surgery, but I am saying if you are ever stuck on an elevator with me and someone else and you have an aneurysm, you're better off with me. You're still going to die, but you're probably better off with me because at least I would have an objective and I'm like, okay, I know what we're going in here to look for. But so I left college. I became a banker of all things at a call center for a bank. So I was the guy that you talk to if you wanted to like open a new account or make a transfer, put stop payment on a check or apply for a credit card or blah, blah, blah. At age 18, of course, my 40-year-old coworkers like did not like me. I'm like, I don't understand why everyone doesn't like me. They're like, because they're 40 and they have the same job as you and you just got out of high school. And then after about once I turned 18 and I figured out, I'm like, oh, I'm a legal adult and I have a good job and money and still live at home. So I don't need any of this money. So I can just fly back and forth to New York whenever I want. And I had a friend there and I'd stay with him and explore the city. And so I kind of just had a feeling, I'm like, that's where I feel like if you've never been to New York City, or if you have, the second you are standing in Manhattan, you immediately know whether you belong there or not. Like if you feel like you are set back on your wireless charging dock when you're standing in Manhattan, like that's when you know, like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. It's funny, the first time I went to LA was 2017. And was it 2017? Yes. And I remember for a brief moment when I got back to New York and it was cold and rainy in April. And I remembered thinking, like, did I pick the wrong city? Like, was I supposed to move to LA? I stand by my choice, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. With what I do nowadays, I realize, oh, I could actually live anywhere. It doesn't matter where I live because what I do is either on the road, on tour, or it's, from my apartment. But yes, I moved to New York thinking I was going to be a musical theater actor. And I just figured, oh, well, Broadway is just the way that you do that. I'd never really envisioned another pathway for myself. And I guess to steer this towards what we're meant to talk about, I'll offer a brilliant segue. I never really had another idea of like, who am I supposed to be? What's my life supposed to be about? How am I supposed to get there? I just kind of always assumed the point of my life, if I'm successful at my life, I will one day end up a professional musical theater actor on Broadway, making my living primarily from being cast in Broadway shows and singing and dancing in musicals and tap dancing on stage in a production of 42nd Street, which is still my dream, kind of. It wasn't until I met when did we meet? In 2009, October. It was the first day I ever got in drag. It was just to like help volunteer for this drag pageant for charity. And I met backstage, Caldwell was his name, who was a drag queen who went by the name Kitten Withawhip at the time. And we met, we became best friends. We moved in, we became roommates, and then Kitten Withawhip became my drag mother. Kitten Withawhip, several years later, once she reached the pinnacle of Manhattan drag nightlife, she decided, I'm changing my name. And I was like, what are you changing it to? And she's like, Bob. And I'm like, what, Bob? She's like, yes, Bob the drag queen. And people in New York were like, you're committing career suicide. This is you're never going to work again. And then fast forward to 2016, and RuPaul says, the winner of season 8 of RuPaul's Drag Queen, America's Next Drag Superstar, is Bob the drag queen. I was like, God damn it, you did the thing. But when I met Bob also moved here with a similar concept. Like, okay, went to college for theater. The thing that you do is you audition for Broadway shows. And then Bob got typed out at an audition for Ragtime, which, of course, if you're not in theater, typed out means they just kind of look at you and sized you up. And they're like, yeah, you're not what we're looking for. And Bob's like, I'm a 6'1" tall black man. How am I not the type for Ragtime? To be fair, they didn't know that he's not a singer. But anyway, and he said, that's when I realized, like, why show up and ask for opportunities to perform when I could just create my own opportunities to perform? And having already started doing drag, Bob started just throwing parties around town. Like, he did a Halloween in July, and he was a waiter, and he was a bartender and a character actor at this theme restaurant called Jekyll and Hyde, where there was 2 of them here. And it's like this spooky kind of haunted house, whatever, museum kind of restaurant. And then there's waiters he would just act like the butler. And it's funny because people would be like, oh, ha, you're really funny. Could I get another Diet Coke? And he's like, I'm not the waiter. I am the butler. And he would say that jokingly, but also seriously, like, I'm literally not your waiter. And I don't get food for people. But he rented out the top of Jekyll and Hyde, the bar, and threw this big party. And then, the next day it's in all the gay rags and the society pages. And he, back when we would call them a faux queen, nowadays you would just call them a drag queen, meaning a woman, someone who is assigned female at birth, does drag just like I would do drag. And I don't mean a drag king. I mean a woman doing drag as a drag queen. So he did a faux queen pageant. And I love that Bob was always creating opportunities for himself, but like they were also opportunities for other people. Speaking of language, my God, we would not call it this. I guess just for historical accuracy, I will say what we called it. I will also preface it by saying, trigger warning, it is now considered a transphobic slur. But we started doing drag in 2009, and it wasn't really until 2011, maybe 2012, that I feel here in the United States anyway, we really had that conversation about the slur tranny. We used it until then, drag queens used that word interchangeably with drag queen. It was sort of a word we used among ourselves. It's sort of an umbrella term for like drag queens, trans women who also do drag, and, just cross-dressers, which are just generally transvestites, people who don't identify as one female, but they just like dressing up as one, but they're not a drag queen or a performer. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, he started a theater company we called then Tranny Repertory Theater, or Tranny Rep for short. And we did Little Shop of Whores, in which I played Shemore, and Bob played not the plant, but rather the vagina that ate cum and then got bigger and bigger throughout the play. But what I loved was that Bob created this show as an opportunity for other people. I'm like, here he is putting a audition notice online, and actors are showing up to audition for Bob, and he's casting this production. And then, he just got some bar and said, hey, let's do this at your bar. We'll do it upstairs during the afternoon when normally you have nothing going on. And I remember he created the ticket structure. So tickets cost a certain amount. If you sell X number of tickets, then you get half of each ticket. If you sell more than that, you get 75% of each ticket. If you sell beyond that, you get 100% of every ticket. So he structured it in a way. The guy who played not the dentist in our production, it was the gynecologist. Everyone was there for him at the show, because he's like, you don't have to tell me twice. He packed the audience, because for him, he's like, oh my God, I'm making $500 doing this show, whereas no one else is actually getting paid. So I love that he was always creating opportunities for himself. He was creating opportunities for other artists as opportunities for himself. So here's the segue to the bar question, which is one day, Bob and our friend Frostie Flakes, another now retired drag queen, Bob and Frostie, they went to XES Lounge. It's spelled capital XES, capital XES. And I guess it's sex spelled backwards.
Oh, yeah, I just got that.
Yes. XS Lounge was on 24th Street, just off 7th Avenue. So, Chelsea, the sort of gay neighborhood. Well, back in the day, it was the gay neighborhood. Yeah. Back when I moved here, that was still the gay neighborhood, and it was becoming that Hell's Kitchen is the new gay neighborhood. So they went to XS Lounge, and they noticed that XS Lounge had an event, either karaoke or drag or some official entertainment slotted for every single night of the week, except for Monday. So they went to XS Lounge and they asked Joseph, the owner, hi Joseph, shout out. They said, do you guys have a drag show on Monday nights? And they said, no. And they said, you do now. We'll be back next Monday. Please have the stage set up for us at 10 p.m. We're going to give you a 10 o'clock show. We're bringing the audience. We'll do the promotion. Don't you worry. And if you like us, then we can talk and we can figure out terms going forward. If you don't like us, oh, well, you had a free show and we packed the place for one night. And so XS Lounge, and they were not necessarily one of the bigger bars, which sort of made them one of the bars you like more, because it's not some big packed club where you put on pretense, and you have to act so cool or whatever. It was more like the Cheers, if you, the TV sitcom Cheers, like it was more like your neighborhood home bar where you would go and hang out and people knew you and the bartender knew your drink. And so every Monday night from, I forget what year they started, but I would say roughly about 2010, 11, for the next maybe 3-4 years, every Monday night we would be at XS Lounge seeing Bob and seeing Kitten Withawhip and Frostie Flakes in their show Sisters, with a question mark at the end.
So you've talked a lot about Bob, but I want to hear about you. So you first got into drag just as kind of like a shits and giggles because you were volunteering for something. What did it feel like that first time?
You know how I describe the first time you get in drag, the first time you are standing in Manhattan?
Yeah.
Well, the first time you get up in drags, if it just clicks and you just feel like, oh my God, I don't know what it is, but this is just right, then you know. Funny enough, a lot of trans women end up discovering sort of that. I can't speak for trans women, but they discover this way. I had a lot of friends who started doing drag and later realized like, oh, no, you know what? I don't like taking the drag off. This is actually who I am. And so the first time I did drag, I'll say I was, I never auditioned for a Broadway show or anything other than that one that I didn't get. But I did have the cleanest sounding taps in the room. I just realized I was looking down at the floor the whole time. But I was doing a production of the musical The Cradle Will Rock. And the most insane production. Oh my God, this music director was, anyway. I was in the show with a friend, not a friend, but an actor who I met doing that show, Alex Michaels, a native New Yorker. And I remember we kind of were flirting, kind of into each other, but it was during my first year of sobriety. And so I was doing the whole like no sex for my first year. So we would just hang out and go out together. And he mentioned that he was a drag queen and showed me pictures and stuff. And so I have that in the back of my head. And I had volunteered to help at this drag pageant. And I'm like, yeah, what do you need? They're like, we need another drag queen. And I'm like, oh. And a friend, it was like one of those things where you're like, do I speak at this? Like, I know that I have a calling. I want it. Like when I was a kid, I always wanted to do drag. Like if my mom came home and saw that her makeup had been ransacked, despite having two other sisters, it was like, Ben, were you going through my makeup again? Ben is my name out of drag for those who don't know. Like, Ben, were you going through my makeup again? It was never, she suspected my sisters. And by the way, I do not want people to picture that here I am, 10 years old, applying makeup, and I was like a young James Charles with a beat mug. No, I mean like I would take like an eyeliner pencil and draw like a grid on my face like Hellraiser. And no, not in a Lee Bowery way, like I'm turning looks. More in a way like, I don't know how to put makeups on my head, but I guess this goes here and that goes. Like I had no concept of how to do makeup. I still kind of don't. I'm not a makeup queen, which Bob the drag queen is my drag mom. So go figure. But at any rate, like they would frequently come home and like I'd be in my parents' room and they'd walk in and catch me wearing one of my mom's skirts or wearing her heels. Or like I just always loved dress up and all things frilly and feminine, not because that was part of my identity. It was just, I was just like, how does not everyone realize how much fun this is? And so I had agreed to do drag, and I told Alex Michaels, I'm like, Alex, I need you to put me in drag. Now, Alex's drag name is Alexis Michelle, and if people are familiar with that name, it's because Alexis Michelle went on to do season 9 of Drag Race, the year after Bob was on. So Alexis Michelle put me in drag for the first time. It was criminal. I don't know. It was also a different time. It was kind of like during the second season of Drag Race. Like RuPaul's Drag Race changed the game, and it also changed the face of drag makeup and sort of standardized something that never had standards exactly. Not that it's standards, it just was not standardized. But Alexis Michelle puts me in drag. I walk from her place to this high school where we're putting on this drag show for charity. And I remember like walking outside in drag and not wanting anyone to clock me. So like with a full wig on and with heels on and with a dress on, I'm like wearing like a man's like Inspector Gadget style tan trench coat over it to like hide. And I remember like I had this feeling like someone or society itself is going to stop me when I go outside. Like I'm going to encounter the physical or verbal, no, you can't. And I remember kind of realizing in retrospect, people were just probably like, yeah, that's just a woman walking down the street. Not that I looked like a woman, but like no one cared. I mean, it's beautiful about New York City. No one cares. Walk outside naked, wearing a diaper and whatever. No one cares. So I remember like taking selfies of myself backstage and just like I did not want to take the drag off. And at the end of that night, or the very next day, instead, I emailed the organizers of the pageant a selfie. I went and created a Honey La Bronx at gmail.com. Like I was so excited to set up this persona for myself, and I emailed them from that. And I was just like, I am giving you 364 days notice that I would love to compete in next year's pageant. And I guess people are probably going to ask where I got the drag name from. 11 years prior, when I was 19 years old, I had already started visiting New York. And I remember when I was in New York, I loved hearing the Bronx. It just, have you been to New York?
Yes.
Okay. When you hear the Bronx, does that not just sound tough?
Well,
does everyone have that
can
same?
you do it in a New York accent for me, please?
Oh, I don't have a New York accent.
Yeah.
I have a Midwestern
Come on,
accent.
put it on for me.
Oh, I was like the Bronx.
Yeah, that sounds tough. Yeah, you sound so tough.
It just sounds tough. Like if I said like, "Hey, I'm heading to Queens. Oh, I'm going to Staten Island." Well, Staten Island is mayhaps a bit rougher than the Bronx, but it just sounded so New Yorky and so tough. And I also remember the first time I heard the Bronx was watching Beaches, which of course, like you do when you're in third grade. Third grade, you're about like maybe like 8 or 9 years old. 7 or 8. 8. Final answer. And so I'm 8 years old watching Beaches and the CeCe Bloom, Bette Midler. Well, when she's young, so she's played by Mayim Bialik, she is saying like, oh, well, technically I don't live in New York. I live in the Bronx. Hearing that, I was like, the Bronx. I can't say I live in the Milwaukee. You don't say I'm from the Australia. Like the fact that there's a definite article in the name of that city, like that. It's a borough is what it is, but that borough starts with a the. It just struck my ear as odd. And I remember when I started visiting New York and I speak Spanish, I started thinking, I wonder if in Spanish, do they say La Bronx? La Bronx. Honey La Bronx. That will be my drag name. Boom. That's just how it popped into my head. God or comma just put it there.
But so like, did it happen like when you first saw yourself in drag, or had you just been storing it up? Like, oh yeah, this is the name.
19 years old. I had never done drag before. So for 11 years, I didn't do drag for the first time until I was 30. I'm a very, very old man. And so for 11 years, I'm walking around knowing my drag name, but I have no concept, no visual even of who Honey La Bronx is.
But is that just so when you meet people at clubs and they say, oh, if you were a drag queen, what would your drag name be? You'd like had the answer straight away. Or is it like...
Oh, many people knew my drag name for years. I love my drag name. I also am very critical of drag names. Like not just anybody gets to tell me their drag name. And I'm like, good for you. I love that. Even Frostie Flakes, I was just like, I do not like your drag name. And when Bob the drag queen was Kitten Withawhip, I was like, I do not like your drag name. I love Bob the drag queen. In fact, I thought Bob had the best drag name until the day Bob came home and said, I found a drag queen with a better name than me. And I said, who? Or a better name than I. There was a drag queen from Australia. I'm sure by now you've heard of her, and her name is
Karen.
Now, this is before the association with the word Karen. This is back when Karen was just a name. But yes, Karen from Finance. It's just the best. It's just the best name. It's just the best name. So that was my drag name. And it was just the day that I'm like looking into the mirror and I'm applying lip gloss and I'm looking in the mirror. And for a second, I jumped back. I was like, oh my God, like that looks like my sister is looking at me, or it looks like my mom is like, I'm seeing hints of the women in my family looking at me. And it was just such an incredible discovery for me.
So if we're back in XES Lounge and there's a Monday night and there are performances, are you performing?
I don't think I had performed until, when was my first time performing? My first time performing at XES Lounge, I probably could Google that info and find it somewhere. I'm going to guess it was sometime in 2010 or 2011. I think my first time performing was actually in the pageant. It was called the Miss Sobriety pageant. It was for people who are in recovery. Which I guess I'm also outing Bob as someone who's sober, but Bob also talks about that openly. So I remember I just always had it in me to write parody songs. Even when I was like a kid, like I thought in parody songs. And so the first parody song I wrote, I just got it in my head that I wanted to write a parody song to Buenos Aires from Evita, only because is it not one of the best songs there is? I realized later, I'm like, I chose a 1,000-piece puzzle to try to put together. Like that song, the lyrics are like custom cut by Freemasons, and it's a tricky song to write a parody for. So I wrote this parody of that song, with lyrics talking about my journey in sobriety. And I think that was my first performance in drag. No, that was not my first performance in drag. But at any rate, I had very limited performing experience as a drag queen. The first year of doing drag, I think I had only done drag maybe like 6 or 7 times. But so I remember the nightmare of Bob having me be a guest in his show, because when you're doing drag, in your mind, you imagine like, oh yeah, then I'll be on stage and then like the song will start and then I'll just be like on stage and I'll be like fierce, and then this part of the music happens and then I'll just be like fierce and I'll be turning and then I'll do this thing and it'll be cute. Then you get on stage and you realize, I have no idea what to do. And like, I don't know what to do with my arms. And like, I just had no idea what to do in drag. As a musical theater performer, I am much more comfortable. I'm not someone who just goes to a club and dances. I don't enjoy just like, oh, my favorite song came on, let's get on the dance floor. Absolutely not.
Really?
I do not boogie. My body does not freely respond to music. When I was 11 and I started
start tap dancing.
Yeah, honestly, I once went back to Wisconsin on a visit, and I went to La Cage, the local gay bar, and I wore tap shoes on the dance floor, thinking like, this will be the thing. If I wear tap shoes, then I'll feel. And no, I was
and you fucked up their floors.
Probably. I also just fucked up, I think, just my whole look at me. But I was used to you choreograph a number. You block a number. You plan out a number. Like, here is how the number is going to happen on stage. So I'm not someone who just like, hey, put on Beyonce, or a song comes on, or someone's like, do Call Me Maybe, and then I just whatever. I'm not but like if it was choreographed, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll give you a double pirouette. I'll do opening number of chorus line. But I'm not just someone who like just is spontaneous. Even if I'm very spontaneous as a queen, on the microphone and talking with the audience and bantering. But I have to have a plan before I get on stage, even if only so I can completely abandon that plan. It's like I still need that skeleton, even if I'm never going to come back and touch base. I need to start from there. If I go on stage with nothing, it's like if you gave me a blank canvas and you're like, paint anything, go. And I'm like, I have no idea what to paint. If you said, paint some kind of a person.
Then you'd draw a dinosaur.
Sure. I mean, I might like, I'm drawing a dinosaur who thinks he's a little boy named Ralph, whatever. But I remember doing there's an awful, not awful. It's just, you're welcome. YouTube the song Lady Bump by Penny McLean from the original, I think Silver Connection was, I think, the band that she was in. And I'm talking, you want the music video of Lady Bump. The which camera do I look at version, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I basically did that song because I saw another drag queen do it, and I was like, I guess I'll do that. And I just remember being on stage like, I have no idea what to do. And then my wig comes off, which was not intentional, and I just embarrassed myself is what I did. But I will say, when we did Little Shop of Horrors, Bob wrote a bunch of parody songs for that. and then said, okay, so I need you to record your vocals. And I'm like, what do you mean record my vocals? He's like, well, we're good, so to lip sync to. And I'm like, oh, why wouldn't I just sing live? He's like, because the rest of us are lip syncing. And I'm like, well, I actually sing. Why don't I just sing? Oh, by the way, I could really get into my, I'm going to get in trouble, but I could really get into my gripe about drag in the UK, but that's a different story. But you know what it is? It's just the whole looking down on lip syncing as if it's a lesser art form, or as if I tour with my drag show. I did a show in London, in Brighton, and in Manchester. And in Brighton, if you do drag, you are a cabaret performer. If you do drag, you are standing there on stage and singing live. And anything that is not that is considered lazy or fake or fraud or phony. And I remember showing someone, if you have never seen Bob the Drag Queen do It's All Coming Back to Me by Celine Dion, it is just the best interpretation of the song. It's not a drag number where it's like spliced with other audio. It's just a straight through number, and every nuance, every thought, every hesitation in that song, Bob accentuates and punctuates and brings to life and makes it visual in a way that is so hilarious and so compelling. And I remember showing this to someone in Brighton. I'm like, no, you don't get. Lip syncing is not, let me show you this. And I showed it to him. He's like, yeah, but he's not even singing it though. I'm like, do you not, how are you missing the point here?
So basically, fuck Brighton. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't say it, but no, I mean, not even fuck Brighton. Because you know what? I was in Brighton for a night, well, for 2 nights. And I saw some old man on stage in an ill-fitting dress singing standards. But like it was more like not even camp, because camp suggests that like you can be in on the joke. It was just like, now it's my turn to get up on stage and put lipstick on and get in a shiny dress and sing the same karaoke songs everyone else who is in their 50s, in the 90s or 2000s, songs that they would appreciate because they are the songs they're familiar with. Do you know what I mean?
So this was not the highlight of the tour.
It just was not. It was not. I'm like doing my number and people are just like staring at me with their jaws dropped like they don't understand what they're watching. And people were like, but I just think it's lazy lip syncing. I'm like, I am dripping in sweat after my first number. What looks lazy about this to you? And like I was just like, literally, they would, if I just stood on stage and half-ass sang Memory from Cats, they would be more amused. And I'm like, you're taking the art of drag and putting it in such a narrow, tiny box, saying that you can only do drag if you're a singer. Like, do you realize how ridiculous that is? But at any rate, I was going back to
yes. Where were we?
Why don't I just sing my own songs in Little Shop of Horrors? There we are. And Bob said, and I'm so happy that he taught me this lesson. Bob said, there's this thing that when you're on stage singing in drag, you get away with, ooh, look at me, I'm actually singing. And truthfully, I knew that. And that was kind of why I wanted to sing, because I'm like, I want the safety and comfort of all I have to do is stand on stage and sing. And Bob said, when you lip sync, it forces you to be bigger than life. And so here I am on stage in rehearsal, lip syncing to a recording of my own song. And I remember the discomfort of, oh my God, like, it becomes obvious when you are lip syncing that I can't just mimic that I'm actually singing. Everything has to be bigger. Everything has to be amplified, and everything must be assigned a gesture or a nuance or some kind of reference. And I remember feeling I'd never been that kind of exhausted as an actor, ever. Until lip syncing for the first time. And I was like, this is a completely different art form. And it pushed me so far out of my comfort zone. The reason I did not do well at that audition for 42nd Street I am 6 feet tall, maybe 6'1". Alexa, how many meters is 6'1"?
6 feet 1 inch is 1.854 meters.
1.854 meters. I thought so. And so I'm very tall. When I was in a chorus line back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I was one of the best dancers out of the guys. And I remember thinking, like, why am I in the back? Why am I always in the back? Why am I not in front? And they're like, no one would see anyone if you were in front. This is why you're always in the back. So I remember always kind of minimizing myself and making myself small. The hardest thing for me to do on stage is to just stand up straight and put my arms out completely stretched out at my sides with my fingers spread and my palms flat. That to me feels so vulnerable, like my belly is exposed. I've never let myself be that big or take up that much space on stage until I had to do drag and lip sync. And so that was what was inherently uncomfortable to me about drag. And then I started putting numbers together where I kind of had an idea, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this and this and this. And I'm happy to say nowadays I've kind of found what it is that I do. Though I would not ever describe myself as like a lip sync assassin. I objectively do not think I'm a really good lip syncer. If I know the number super well and I know exactly what to do at every point along the way, then, that I do well. But I'm not just someone who boogies to music well.
It's so interesting what you say. Like, so I'm a fellow tall person who is used to minimizing himself for people around him. But so interesting that you're saying that, like, in drag, you felt more exposed than you did as yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I mean, I'm so hidden behind the drag, and yet the drag kind of reveals me in a way. By the way, you said you're a tall person. It sounded to me like I'm a tool person, and I got so excited. A, I was like, when did I mention being a tool person? B, what kind of tools? Do you have a Dremel? Do you do woodwork? Do you do metalwork? Do you do welding?
Oh, no, that was my smart talk.
Okay. I am very much a tool person. You will often find me at home with a shield over my face, like cutting through metal and making. I'm very DIY handyman, etc.
I can't help you.
I don't need the help, frankly.
I can't riff off this at all. I feel really out of my depth. You keep talking about songs from musicals, and I'm like, what? Huh? What?
So XES Lounge, Bob and Frostie, they would just, it's funny, Bob, for being a queen who had just kind of started doing drag and just kind of made his own first show, over time, then he got another show, I think on Tuesdays somewhere, and over the years, eventually he's like, yeah, I work 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week. Like my schedule is filled with shows. And now it becomes, there's a drag queen named Keisha Carr. She now goes as Bearded Bitch, but AKA Keisha Carr. She was also a Broadway actress. She was in the Book of Mormon on Broadway. She moved to New York from Oklahoma and was a guest frequently in Sisters with Bob and Frostie. And my friend Delilah Brooks, who's one of those people who started doing drag and then realized, oh, I'm actually a woman, and is now a trans woman. So many people would arrive in New York for the first time, or would come to visit New York and would become a guest in their show. And it was just a great place for people to discover themselves as an artist. This was back when Drag Race was on Monday nights on Logo Network. And so after their show, people would start arriving at about 10. The show would start at 11. It was very much a thing in New York City drag where if the show is advertised at being as 10 o'clock, it's implied that it starts at 11. In fact, Bob used to do a show at Boots and Saddles, which is very peculiar. I think you may add that to the list, because Boots and Saddles, I believe, is now also closed. And it's a very specific, very particular, very important place. It was on Christopher Street. It then moved and then closed. but it was very much the Christopher Street of drag. But everyone's show is 2 hours long. And if your slot is 8 to 10, your show starts at 8 o'clock, not 8:01, not 7:59. At 7:59, the other queen is finishing her last number, saying thank you, good night, stick around for this next queen. It is a marathon. And at the dot on the hour, hands off the microphone to the next queen, and the next queen starts her 2 hour slot and then hands it off to the next queen. So to let her audiences know that when I say 8 o'clock, I mean 8 o'clock, she would say like 8, whatever time it was, 8 or 10 o'clock, white people time. And she was like, if you show up at 8:01, you will have missed the first 60 seconds of my show. So that was what was special about XS Lounge, was just I would go there every Monday for hanging out beforehand, for sitting through the drag show. And then as soon as the drag show ended, the very next minute, Drag Race came on. We watched that for an hour and change. And then we watch Untucked for the next 30 minutes. So it's like a 4-hour time slot every Monday night of being there. And for their very last show, this is very special for me to talk about. And I don't know that there's whether there's footage of this, but for their very last show, they decided that, of course, they're going to do an encore. But they decided in advance their encore was going to be the Animaniacs version of The Song That Never Ends. And they looped the song. I think Bob made like a 2-hour long version of it. And so they start singing the song. The audience is kind of laughing like, oh, ha, ha, we get the joke. We get the joke. 5 minutes goes by. 10 minutes goes by. 20 minutes goes by. People are living their life. And then one by one, people kind of start, all right, well, I should get going, putting their coats on, starting to leave. And I guess talking about XS Lounge in terms of when that place closed and was no more, it's also, I guess, important to talk about when Sisters with Kitten and Frostie also closed and was no more, because in a way, for me, and I'm sure for many people, it was kind of the end of XS Lounge, or at least it was the end of that of an era for us. And I can talk quickly about what happened with XS Lounge after that, but there was like a line formed to the stage. And picture just like the tiniest, dinkiest little bar there ever was. When I say stage, I mean like, 4 little pieces of stage that are shoved and locked together. But there was like a line formed for people to go up to the stage. Like it was almost like a meet and greet, or like seeing someone after their show. And I'll never forget Tyler, my friend Tyler Easter, who had just moved to New York a few years prior. And like when he was new in town, he came to XS Lounge and found Sisters with Kitten and Frostie. And that became his Monday night, his touchstone. That became where he and his boyfriend Andrew came every Monday night. It became how they met their friends. Like your circle of friends at a certain point originated from being in that audience and seeing each other every Monday night. And I remember at the end of the show, Bob told me about this later. It's funny, they had a bag of confetti. And so there's a certain point in the song where Frostie would throw confetti up in the air. And we also kind of realized like eventually she's going to run out of confetti, but people didn't want it to ever end. So some people are like running and grabbing magazines and newspapers and ripping them up and refilling her bag with confetti so she wouldn't run out. And they are just 1,000% committed, just lip syncing The Song That Never Ends. It ended up going on for a little over an hour. I forget exactly how long it was, but like I just remember they formed a line to the, and this is their encore after an hour and a half long show. They formed a line to the stage. And I remember like Bob later told me that like while he's sitting up there just lip syncing, looking straight forward, lip syncing, people are having conversations with him. And Tyler was like telling him, like, I want you. Oh, God, I'm getting choked up thinking about this. He's like, I want you to know what your show meant to me. Like, your show was home when I moved away from home and came to New York. Your show was home when I came out to my family and when I met my first boyfriend and when I was going through my first breakup. Like, your show was the constant in my life for all of these formative milestones in my life as a gay man. And just like being on stage in character, lip syncing to the song that never ends, the Animaniacs version, doing the most ridiculous shit, while someone else is like pouring their heart out and acknowledging you for the difference you've made in their life. And it's just like a line of people just doing the same thing. And then like eventually it's like me and like a couple of like core group friends, and like the three of us, four of us, five of us maybe at most, standing around in the bar. And we're the last ones left, and we're kind of like laughing like, oh my God, you guys did it. You guys pulled it off. That's awesome. And they're still lip syncing. And then we finally realized like, oh, they're not going to stop until we leave too. And it was just like, we go outside, we close the door, we peek in, they're still going, we peek in, they're still going. And then like finally we hear the music stop. And it was like the most, and it's, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Dancer in the Dark with Björk, but she talks about loving the musicals, and her least favorite thing was that last song where it gets so big and the camera spirals up through the roof and it's just this big wide and you just know it's over. And she says, I hated that, so I would leave the cinema right after the next to last song, and then it just went on forever. I've seen Dancer in the Dark so many times that like what I just said there was almost verbatim the line, and it's not the kind of movie you see more than once. If you've seen it, you know why. But I love that what they created for their final show, it basically never ended in the audience's mind. Like no one saw the end of it. It just continued on forever. And yeah, and after that, XS continued for a while. When I have my own podcast as well, Big Fat Vegan Radio, and I remember my then co-host Laura, she and I wanted to do a live show to follow the New York Vegetarian Food Festival, which was on a weekend in the afternoon. So when it's done, we threw like the after party. And I remember like feeling like I'm kind of walking in Bob and Frostie's footsteps, like assuming their stage and their venue, like having them in my audience and having our listeners in my audience. It was just very special because I knew that XS Lounge was the place I could go to because I had and I should say, when New York State passed marriage equality, Bob and I and Frostie were members of a group called Queer Rising. If you watched season 8 of Drag Race, you saw probably a clip of Bob and I getting arrested for blocking traffic for marriage equality. That was with Queer Rising. And when we were, putting a lot of pressure on the state to bring marriage equality to a vote. And when they were doing so, we were all up in Albany, 5 to a hotel room, sleeping on the floor every morning, first in line to get in the Senate gallery. And I had my laptop there. And I remember I'm on my Facebook status, I'm constantly updating on my I guess this is before you would do that on your phone, but I'm constantly updating on my laptop like, okay, all right, we're taking a break and they're going to come back and reconvene at blah, blah, blah. Still no vote yet, but blah, blah, blah. I remember standing outside of XS Lounge and Joseph, the owner, is talking to me. And this is before I know that he knows who I am. This is when we're very, very new to Sisters being a regular show. And he turns to me and he says, I want you to know that when marriage equality happened, we were all here at XS Lounge glued to the television. CNN was on. We were all watching the news. But it is not from the it is not from the news that we learned that we now had our right to marry. The bar was glued to your Facebook page. I don't know if it was like on the screen or they were just constantly refreshing. He's like, the moment you posted, we won. That was the moment we as a bar knew and celebrated that we had marriage equality. It was a few minutes later that the news announced it as well. Like there's just so many memories that connect me to that place.
Oh, wow. And so after the Sisters show ended, did your attendance there kind of peter off?
It really did. I didn't, it wasn't just XS Lounge. It was really seeing, Bob and I were roommates for 4 years. And during that time, I've certainly seen him perform at other venues, but it became a Monday night thing for me. I would say, I don't know if I would still say that this holds true. I mean, who knows what we're going to return to post-COVID, but, for a long time anyway, in New York City, if you just got off the bus and you wanted to know, take me to your leader, who is the top drag queen in town? The top drag queen in town is whichever drag queen does the Monday night show at Barracuda Lounge at midnight. That is officially whoever the queen is. Back in the day, that used to be Jackie Beat. Then it became Candace Kane. Then it became Peppermint. And right after Peppermint, it became Bob the Drag Queen. And then after Bob, it became Monet Exchange, who, of course, then she went on Drag Race and became famous. And then I think it became Brenda Darling. So after Bob left XS Lounge, Bob basically left XS Lounge to move to Barracuda, which was just like 2 blocks away and was sort of like their competition. And you can't compete with Barracuda Lounge because they're just like, they're it. I mean, they're broad. I hate to say it this way, but they were in terms of gay bars as drag venues, Barracuda was a Broadway venue, whereas XS Lounge was an off-Broadway venue.
Here you go with those musical references again, expecting I'm going to know what you're talking about.
Which is not to say it was lesser than. I used to be in a relationship with a guy who was an off-Broadway theatrical manager, and he said to me at the time, he's like, Broadway has become the place where what is successful on Broadway is essentially a polished turd. It's the place where they're sinking so much money into the show that it had better be a crowd pleaser that pleases the folks from Ohio who come here for vacation, which is why you get big glossy Broadway musicals that are family friendly. He's like, nowadays you go off Broadway if you want art. It was off Broadway where Little Shop of Horrors started. It was off Broadway where Hedwig and the Angry Inch started. And that was very true. I feel like that was very true of XS Lounge. Like that's what it was. It was only a hair. Oh, fast forward to Off the Beaten Path, and I'll talk about where they moved. But it was only Chelsea is wider than just this. But in gay terms, Chelsea is 8th Avenue from 14th Street to 23rd Street, end of story. Yes, it expands beyond that, but that is sort of the spine of Chelsea. And if you are on the east side of 8th Avenue, that is it. That is the strip. That is Chelsea. And so Barracuda was on 22nd, just off 8th Avenue. And I mean, it could not be more central. Like it's really it's right in the center of the butthole of Chelsea. And we're gays, so I'm talking about that's the sweet spot, not the bad spot. Whereas XS Lounge was on 24th Street, just off of 7th Avenue, which if you are in the heart of Chelsea, 7th Avenue and 24th Street feels like it's off the beaten path. But it's really what made it special. It's really what made it like the Cheers of. So I kind of stopped going there after Bob's Monday Night Show, and instead I started going to Barracuda for Bob's Monday Night Show. And then when Bob, got on Drag Race and moved on from there, I hate to say I kind of stopped regularly going to drag shows. I lived at 44th and 10th after Bob and I won what's called the Affordable Housing Lottery. And so I moved out from living with Bob. People always say, what's the Affordable Housing Lottery? And I say, oh, good question. It's a lottery for affordable housing. I don't know how else to explain it. You get a luxury apartment, but you pay like 20% of what the rent would be. So don't hate me because I'm young. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful. Hate me because I now live on 57th and 11th, and I live in a large, giant one-bedroom apartment in a luxury building for only like $675 a month. Anyway, but I moved to 44th and 10th, and Ms. Cracker, who's my drag sister, Ms. Cracker and Monet Exchange, who's my aunt, they had a show together at Hardware on, I think, 46th or 47th and 10th. And that was on Sunday nights. They had a show together. So I would go to see their show on Sundays. But I feel like when XS closed, I kind of stopped. Eventually, some company bought out that building and wanted, and I think it's still there intact. It's like, if you're going to tear down this building, then fucking tear it down and build whatever condo or bullshit you want to build.
Oh, yeah.
But like, there was even like graffiti on the wall. Like, people like wrote things like, "This used to be the most special gay." I'm sorry, pounded my table. The most special place in the world, and you killed it. Like, people were writing things like that on the wall. Like, fuck you for making this place end. It was such a special spot that can never be replaced.
And so then I'm going to ask you a question, and this is a bit of a naff question, but I think you're going to go with me on this. Naff, yeah. Oh, wait, do I
only know the word naff as in naff off.
So, like, okay, so naff is like stupid.
Okay.
Is that the same?
Oh, I'm seeing it now as an adjective. As a verb, it means go away. As an adjective, it means lacking taste or style.
So this is a question that's lacking taste or style. What did XS Lounge teach you about yourself?
Ooh, wow. Well, as a drag performer, XS Lounge, and it's never just any one thing. It's not just XS Lounge. It's also Bob, and it's also Bob's show, and it's also that night and that performance. But it is where I learned, I need to show up and come to the stage with something ready, with something prepared. Like, the audience, I think that's one of the beautiful things about drag, is that the audience immediately, whether they've ever seen drag before in their life or not, they can spot inauthenticity immediately. And it was obvious to me and obvious to the audience in that first performance that this is inauthentic. This is not the real thing. And it was obvious to the audience that it was obvious to me that it wasn't going well. And God bless you, they were still so gracious about it. But and as someone who doesn't drink, also a lot of people who were also gay and sober also came to this bar. So it was also such a safe space for me as someone in early recovery, like with only 2 years sober. So it felt like such a safe place to go. Because if I met someone else in recovery who was like, I'm nervous to go to a bar, I'm like, oh, girl, there's 10 of us there who don't drink. I don't know how the bartenders make any money. We also tip generously and get Red Bull. But so it taught me, I think, that as a performer, like anything other than, like, nothing will do other than authenticity. It's the place that I think taught me what I am and am not comfortable with as a gay man and as a drag queen. I think what XS Lounge taught me was, I don't know how to say this other than to kind of tie it to the old adage of like treat people how you want to be treated. Like, XS Lounge showed me, like, I dated someone a couple of years back, and I was his first relationship. And I remembered thinking, however this goes, whether this is long term, whether this ends, whatever happens, I want to model for him what a relationship can be, what open, honest communication can look like, what it feels like to be able to be 100% you and your authentic self, so that he can always have this as a frame of reference, right? That's kind of what XS Lounge was for me. Like, it's got to be at least this welcoming. I guess that's what XS Lounge taught me, is what it felt like. XS Lounge taught me what being welcome feels like. Oh, I can't even say it better than that.
Did you ever go to XS Lounge? Well, if you did, I would love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, MySpace, and Facebook with the username KAndersonMusic. Get in touch and tell me what you got up to. Share any photos or funny stories. I want to hear about it. And whilst you're at it, go and give Honey a follow on Instagram. Her username is Honey La Bronx, and you can also check out her website, which is vegandragqueen.com. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, which is called Well Grown Boys, and is also conveniently playing underneath my talking right now on all good streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.